all of our experiences, and for those of us who've had more experience, what the rest of us can maybe learn from that. So really, there's no specific rules for who can speak or when. So maybe just to get us started, we could talk about what it means to be emotionally engaged in a museum, or how we might define that. I guess, Gabbie, I didn't send that on my list of questions to you, but would you be okay taking that one for starters? Like, what does it mean to be emotionally engaged?
Sure. So, I guess that's an open question, is what I would say, and it was one that really drove us to, pursue funding for the prior project, and I think for the team that we worked with at the museum, at the Boston Museum of Science, there's sort of a long history in research in informal science learning, looking at, the sort of three-part model of engagement: cognitive engagement, behavioral engagement, emotional engagement, with emotional engagement being the least well understood of the three. And certainly the one that there's little history for how to measure and really engage in being able to study that. And so that was really the impetus for the prior study. And what we wanted to do was simply take a model of emotion in learning from the affective sciences, take measures that would allow us to ambiently assess where kids were, what their core affective experience was, and I'll explain what I mean by that in a second, and then relate that to their cognitive and behavioral engagement and see if we could recognize emotional engagement states that might be really relevant or important to pursue. So the model of emotion and learning that we took on was to look at visitors' core emotion state. And what that means is that rather than looking at their basic emotions, like were they happy, were they sad, we tried to go to a preconceptual level and assess sort of two dimensions of emotion. So one is, how activated is their sympathetic nervous system activity? So how up do they feel? And then also, what's the valence of that? So how pleasant or unpleasant do they feel, positive or negative? And we mapped that on two dimensions. And then we tried to see how that was related to their behavioral and their cognitive engagement. And after, I guess, long story short, all that research, in this particular exhibition that we were looking at called Math Moves, we were able to identify three key engagement states, and one that we're pursuing now from a design perspective. So one emotional engagement state that was like the most predominant one that we saw, we were labeling as productive struggle. Basically that state is kids who experience some negative emotion in the form of confusion and a little bit of frustration, paired to higher than baseline sympathetic nervous system activity or activation, and maintaining positive outlook, which basically means that they felt fun, happy, and proud. So that sort of constellation of things together, as they experienced an interactive, we called productive struggle. And then the two other emotional engagement states that we identified were exhilaration and mindful reflection. But it was really the productive struggle one that sort of captured our imagination, and that we're now pursuing in this other project. So I'm curious if there are what people think about that, and if there are other emotional engagement states that you all have studied.
Yeah, and I'm wondering if it would be helpful for me to real quickly share that diagram of the that explains what you're talking about, the different spectrum of emotion. I can do a screen share real quick so everyone can see that, because that helped me understand when I was reading your article. Let me draw that up.
Yeah, so affective scientists, when they think about emotion, they think about it on a few different levels. At the most base level, we think about it from the perspective of, appraisal. So you're continuously appraising the environment along these two dimensions, how negative or positive you feel and how activated you are. And as this process can be, going on unconsciously, or it can be a conscious process where you would label an emotion state with happy or sad, or even more like more tenuous emotion states, not basic emotion states like fatigue could be one. But that's sort of your conscious labeling. This is the dimensions on which you are constantly evaluating the environment. And then as you evaluate the environment, this physiological state creates action tendencies or behaviors that cause you to engage in the environment in a different way, if that makes sense. So, for example, if I have a really high arousal state and I feel really positive, I might have an open smile and be jumping up and down, with exhilaration. Whereas if I felt positive but a low arousal state, I might want to be sitting and reflecting and not engaging very strongly outwardly, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and so my understanding from your article is you use electrodermal sensors and gaze tracking goggles to help to measure participants in this study. And I'm really curious to know if anybody else has used any of these techniques in the past, or other methods for trying to measure engagement that either worked or didn't work for you. Is there anybody that would like to chime in here? Or if not, maybe Gabbie, you can tell us a little bit more about those instruments? I'm seeing, Kristen, are you nodding? Do you want to chime in?
No, I'm sort of new, so I don't have anything necessarily to add. I'm interested in hearing more, but I don't personally have anything to add to that experience.
Yeah, do you have a question for Gabbie?
There was mention of checking out that instrument and how that works. If we could do that, that'd be cool. I apologize, I missed the first part because my speakers wouldn't work. So I might have already missed that. So if I have, please ignore. I will go back and read the recording and all of that.
Sure, I'm happy to talk about that. So we used electrodermal activity sensors. They're basically like they're wireless bracelets, kind of look like a Fitbit that participants wear. They wear 2 armbands on both hands because you have to be able to account for movement that and take that out of the equation when you do your analysis. And basically, they were developed at MIT at the Media Lab. Roz Picard's group there has been developing sensors for ambient measurement of facial recognition, and also these ambient electrodermal sensors. And basically what it gets at is how much the person is sweating as a indication of their sympathetic nervous system activity. So it isn't perfect because it just gives you big peaks. So really just when your sympathetic nervous system is giving you a big reaction, as opposed to like your sympathetic nervous system activity, your arousal level is really more continuous than that. So when we started the project, I was a little nervous when we picked the exhibition we were going to be working in. It's the Math Moves exhibition, and we had we had 6 interactives that the kids could choose to go to. And I thought, oh, I don't know if this is really going to get them peeking out, might be that we'll be measuring all this and they won't. But actually, we had quite a wide range of responsiveness. And I'm trying to look at my slides. Claire, I don't know if you can show. Let's see.
Yeah, if you want, I have that presentation, so if you tell me which one.
Yeah, so can you show the one, it looks like a ton of data, but it has all the kids' reactions on it.
Let me see. I'm going to scroll through.
Claire?
Oh, yeah, am I muted? Sorry, I was muted. Okay.
Okay.
So I have the PowerPoint up, and the purple, the one with all this one?
Yeah, so show the one on top of that first so I can orient everybody.
Okay.
Okay, so this is the actual data, and what you're seeing is one child's emotional responsiveness on those 2 dimensions. So to the left and the right shows you their reported valence, positive feelings and negative feelings. And so to the right, the further you go, the more positive your intensity of your positive feeling. Likewise, the further you go from the midline to the left, the more intense your negative feelings. And then the further you go up, the more peaks you had across the whole exhibition. So you can see that we had kids who gave us no peaks at all, just 1 peak, and then all the way up to 6, 7, 8, 9 peaks, kids who are really reacting strongly. So this is one child on here now. Claire, if you go down one more screen. So this is the whole data set, all the kids in the sample, and you can see that they're quite variable, and that we had kids, one takeaway is that kids have both positive feelings and negative feelings when they report their emotion state at the exhibition, and that means a very targeted thing. So when they reported negative feelings, it was only about frustration and confusion. It wasn't about like feeling sad or anything like that. And then on the right-hand side for positive feelings, it was about pride, happiness, and fun were sort of the 3 dimensions. And you can see that as kids had more peaks, more sympathetic nervous system activity as they went up, that their valence became more variable and more intense too. So I show this slide only to say that it was amazing. This is like an exhibit about ratio and probability, and the kids were actually having sympathetic nervous system peaks in their electrodermal activity, which was really exciting to us because it said, wow, these constructivist interactive exhibitions were really getting the kids engaged in the mental work of thinking about these issues. Because if you look at their behavior, they're not sort of jumping all over the place or anything like that. So it doesn't indicate exhilaration or movement. It really indicates their sort of psychological state in response to the exhibits. Does that help? I don't know if I went off a little bit too much.
That was helpful to me. Did that answer, Kristen, your question a little bit? I want to touch on this question that Jen brought up in the message in the chat, because I had the same question about how these kinds of methods stack up against traditional survey and observation, because that's the tools that are available to most of us. And in your study, you also use this experience sampling questionnaire. So yeah, I'm curious about how that lined up, or how that fed into your study, and how they measured up against each other.
Yeah, so that's exactly how we use experience sampling to get the valence measures. So what all that means is when the kids got to finished disengaged from the interactive, they could spend as much time as they wanted at each component of the exhibition. When they finished each component, we handed them a brief questionnaire that they were able to quickly circle. And basically, it was a like scale. We're asking them to rate the intensity of their feeling. So were you happy? Were you proud? How much did you feel fun? Was it fun? On these different dimensions. And then we used statistical techniques to extract variables that represented positivity and negativity, rather than like the stated subjective basic emotion states that they were reporting. And the reason we did that is because we wanted to reflect core affect as it was represented, as opposed to like these idiosyncratic basic emotions. So when you have a basic emotion like feeling happy, there's lots of different reasons that you might feel that way. So you can't really get a sense of the causality or whether it indicates engagement. But and they're sort of culturally sensitive. But if you look at valence, if you can extract valence from people's reports, that's a universal way that people react. And if you can map that to arousal, then you're actually getting at something that affects the way that they behave in terms of their behavioral engagement and their cognitive engagement. So I think, and I'd be happy to share our surveys that we used. They were good. They were reliable and useful. And then I'm happy to share the information about activation. Activation is sort of harder dimension to get from just asking people, because most people, unless they're having an extreme reaction, aren't consciously aware enough to report if their sympathetic nervous system is activated.
Linda, I saw your comment on the side, and I was curious. So she said she's recorded video of aquarium visitors, I'm guessing, watching an animal show, and then went back, and I'm assuming maybe did some coding with that. And I'm curious, Linda, if you could share with us at all about how you decided on a coding scheme, or what that process was like. And I don't know if you can unmute or maybe type a response, but I'll just throw that out there and see if.
Does that help?
Yeah.
Am I coming? Oh, good. Okay. We had a pre-show which had several conservation sections on it. And it was not while the animals had started the show yet, but there were a number of people in the audience, and we wanted to know what the effectiveness of that was. And certainly we could give them a questionnaire which would force them to watch it, because we'd given them the questionnaire. So we also did this with no questionnaire and just watched people uncued to see if they addressed looking at this, and then afterward could ask them about the conservation messages there. So it was a pretty easy way to know what percentage of the audience was actually engaged with these videos that were going on, whether it caused any sort of an interaction within the group. They talked to each other about it, pointed up at the screen, or whether they were busy cleaning out their purse or feeding their kid or whatever else. So that worked pretty well, considering we didn't have a way to get the audio, but just visually, their state of attention or non-attention was pretty evident. We'd love to be able to do something like the physiological response to see when animals jump, what happens, as opposed to when we're talking about the animals, or when a new animal comes in, what's the level of excitement and how long does that last before, okay, they've had enough of that, now they need a different activity in this show. It's something that's been a challenge to anyone working with animal behaviors. So I'd love to talk to you further about it.
Yeah, that's great. Actually, I'm getting some feedback. Maybe.
Oh yeah,
Linda.
Linda, if you don't. Oh wait.
Yeah, I would love to talk to you more about that. And that's exactly the kind of design question that we're interested in exploring. And of course, it's going to vary across visitors, but thinking about how much talk versus action and what the cadence of that should look like relative to people's sympathetic nervous system, core affective experience and their subjective feelings, and then how that organizes their behavioral relationship to the experience and their social experience. That is exactly the kind of complex question that we're hoping to ask. So, and I'd love to talk to you more about it. We have a new project. Liz Nolman, I see, is on here too, is one of our partners at the Museum of Science. We have a new project that's being funded by the National Science Foundation to take up this question of productive struggle and see if we explicitly try to design for it for the range of visitors who are coming into the space. Can we sort of groom a path by design to support people to maintain positive outlook while they're engaged in activities that may create some confusion or cognitive dissonance? So this is exactly the direction that we're hoping to go. Oh, and I should say, when you were talking, I was thinking one of the things we're going to be looking into is new technologies that allow us to assess all kinds of ethical questions here, but will allow us to assess in crowds people's basic emotion signals. So Microsoft has a new technology that you can use a video into a crowd and be able to assess in time how it's not perfect, doesn't work perfectly yet, but it's interesting because you don't have to like ask them explicitly. You might ask them after the fact, but sort of removes the need to code for those basic emotion states to get at that valence dimension, at least. So it's exciting, interesting new technology that we might be able to bring to bear to this.
Does that mean like taking an average rating of a crowd?
No, it's like each person's face. They can assess their basic emotion in time. It's amazing.
That really does sound like the future.
Actually, there's a picture of it at the top of the slide deck.
Oh, okay.
If you want to show where it says real-time crowd insights.
One moment. Oh. Okay. Is this it? Or did I? Oh, I haven't set it up yet. One sec. Here.
There it is. So you see they were asked to make surprise faces, but you get the idea.
Oh yeah, I see. And so it's picking out their sex, their age. And
yeah, just from the video on the fly.
Yeah. All kinds of potential applications I can imagine.
And if you want to, Claire, the next slide, there's a picture of some of the parent and a child in our study all hooked up to their equipment there, so people can see what that looked like. So we used eye tracking glasses and coded for their gaze after the fact. So there's like a camera in the eye tracking glasses, and it also tracks their pupil gaze. So we can code, I'm sure some of you have used this before, but can code for where their attention was and how long they attended to certain objects. And then we also coded their behaviors, like leaning in and where they placed their hands to their face and when they spoke to their partner. One finding that was really interesting that I didn't talk about in the beginning, so we wanted to do some experimental tests, rather than just exploratory. So one of the things we did was to assign kids to either experience the exhibition with parent or on their own. And so I guess I just throw out a question to the group. What do you think happened to kids' sympathetic nervous system activity when they were with their parents? Do you think it was higher or lower?
I'm going to vote lower.
Anybody else? Yeah, that's right. It was dampened compared to when they were on their own. And the kids had more, intense reports of positive and negative feeling. They were also, when they were on their own, they were also more likely to exit and exhibit more quickly and interact more quickly. They were more likely when they were with their parents to exhibit this productive struggle. And when you look at the actual video, there was, kind of supportive instruction going on, is how I would describe it, where the parents were basically being an intermediary, sort of managing the child's relationship to the interactive. But they were more likely to have that exhilaration experience when they were on their own. So one question that came out of that for us was, can we get parents and kids to experience exhilaration together? And can we get kids to have productive struggle on their own if we change the design?
Those are really interesting questions. And it reminds me of a study that we presented on at the VSA. Is about some work with the Providence Children's Museum. We were looking at parents and children together working on a circuits building exercise. But we didn't really touch on the emotion part, although we did, really try to observe, that kind of productive struggle and where it was happening and what kinds of actions on the parts of parents helped that or hindered that. And I just think it's interesting, especially reading your paper and thinking about all this, that I often myself think more about less about the emotional impact that we might want an exhibit to have than other cognitive impacts, even though the two are very closely intertwined together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the thing that came out of this study, after looking at the findings, and was just that, kids are appraising the environment all the time, continuously. They're assessing on an emotional level that's not conscious whether the environment is novel, whether it's good for them, whether or not they have enough resources to attempt the situation. And it's really guiding and organizing and constraining whether or not they're going to orient to the space. And so I think, whether or not we're designing for it, it's they're organizing their behavior. And so, it was interesting to really see that through the data collection in time in a continuous way. Sort of brought home for us, what if we actively started to design for this explicitly, then what would happen? And so we feel really excited about this new project to try and explore those things.
Yeah, I wonder, can you tell us a little bit about how the findings are feeding into future exhibit designs?
So we don't know exactly yet, except that, and I wish Christine Reish was on the phone to talk to you about this, because she's really more on the side of exhibit design. But this new project is really about, it's a research to practice grant, and the idea is to really try and take on these emotional engagement states and try to design for them. So the first phase is to do a secondary data analysis where we really dissect the supports that were already present in the prior exhibit and try to understand how the kids were using them. And then we're going to do prospectively building out, from an innovation perspective, trying to catalyze and then support this productive struggle state. I know that the new Yaki Gallery at the Museum of Science, when they were working on the design for that, this project was going on and it influenced their thinking. So, for example, whereas they hadn't previously actively tried to create spaces for mindful reflection, and hadn't really thought explicitly about the cadence of the emotional engagement they wanted visitors to experience, they built that in more explicitly. So it's interesting for me as a member of the museum with two small children when I go there to see it does feel quite different from other exhibitions in the space, because there are sort of different interactives that are meant to, and the surrounding, benches and things like that are meant to create and sort of groom space for different emotion states. And I wish Christine was here because she could show you pictures and things. But in the paper that's going to be published in the exhibition, there's some discussion and photographs in that to show how it influenced the thinking there and what it looks like.
Linda has an interesting question at the sidebar. Has this been implemented or studied in an outdoor situation, like a walk in a natural area?
Oh, goodness. Not that I know of. I'm trying to think. Not that I know of. No. I know there was a really interesting study. I think there's still the images are still online in Switzerland in an art museum where they were looking at different visitors and their electrodermal activity in response to different ways to hang various aspects of the art museum. But I'm not aware of any that looked at experiential learning outdoors, but it would be fascinating.
And I guess on a related note, so Linda says into something else for us to discuss. What are the wires and logistics and doohickeys necessary to carry off something like this? And it sounds like some people are interested in what this actually looks like in practice some more.
Yeah, so there was a fair amount of equipment, I would say. So the eye tracking glasses come in a big box, and it's a little bit sensitive, so you can't. We had like a closet off to the side of the exhibition where we stored all of our equipment. And the kids have to be, there actually is a wire and a battery pack for the eye tracking glasses, so they have to wear the glasses. And then they had to wear a fanny pack to put the equipment for the eye tracking. And actually, there's a whole process by which you have to calibrate the gaze tracker in the glasses, where kids have to look at a sensor. They have to be perfectly still, and then look at a sensor as it tracks across a wall. Which it was super interesting because we had the electrodermal bracelets on already. And the most stressful part of the whole thing for the kids was doing this sensor, because sometimes they couldn't get it to calibrate, especially in the corners where they have to sit still and look their gaze down like this in the corners. And some of the kids, we had about 20% of the sample for kids with learning and attention related disabilities, and we had a few kids with autism in the sample, and the kids who were autistic or had ADHD had trouble sitting to do the classes. So that's one thing. In terms of so there's that equipment. And then the Q sensors actually just come in these little, they're like little bracelets. It's basically like having a Fitbit. And you have a connector to your computer that you charge them on, and they're all wireless. So the sensors were pretty good. And then we went through a process where originally we were thinking of, usually with experience sampling, you would use like a pager or a small iTouch or something like that, digital equipment. But we found it was too hard for the kids to wear that or have that on their person and remember to do the survey at the end. We didn't, in the beginning, want them to be interacting with the researchers, so we just thought we'd give them all the equipment, but it just didn't work out. So we just looked for these natural points of when they disengaged, and then we literally did it with paper. So we had a paper survey that the kids filled out at the end of each interactive to get their valence state. And then we had cameras where we were videotaping. So we had the camera from the eye tracker, and then we had cameras set up at various places around the exhibit to capture their orientation from not the first person. So there was a fair amount of equipment, but less wires than you would think. The biggest thing was the eye tracker.
And Jen asked, and I missed this earlier, if people were accurate at rating their emotions or better at rating some than others.
Yes. So we don't know what their actual emotion state is to check it against, but we were able to do principal components analysis to try and understand, were they consistent in, like if they were rating a positive emotion state, were they basically consistent across different questions? And it was, highly reliable. And the positive and negative variables, they came out as really nice variables that applied across all the kids. So yeah, that worked pretty well. And these were middle schoolers. So I think with younger kids, you might have more trouble. With older kids, they might be not so forthcoming. But these were also, for the most part, museum members. So they were all actively engaged visitors and interested to be there and participate. I should say that we had because we were on the floor, we closed the exhibition while we were doing the research, and we set it up so that people could, other visitors could look in to see what was going on in the research, and we had a computer set up with the equipment so that other visitors could try it out, and they were there was a lot of interest in it, so kids could just try on the electrodermal bands and try to get their sympathetic nervous system going, and there was a lot of interest in it. So
that sounds very cool. I wonder what other, if anyone else wants to share from your own experience, what other emotions you might be interested in trying to measure or emotional outcomes from museum exhibits or any other visitor studies type situations. I think the example of the animal shows is really interesting to think about. I wonder if anyone else is picturing other applications that they would want to share. Some places, and I don't know why my brain goes there automatically, maybe because I think the last web chat Rebecca Sobel was on from the Holocaust Memorial Museum. And so obviously that's a whole nother scale of emotion, and the first kind of emotional museum experience that I thought of when I first heard about your work, and then it was very interesting to see that actually you can measure really interesting emotions when people are interacting with math exhibits, which is something very different.
Yeah.
But in a place like that, I know like a lot of museums now incorporate like recovery and reflection places, and it could be interesting to know that those are fulfilling their function after someone's been through maybe a very stressful exhibit experience, something that is necessarily stressful in a way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. From an evaluation perspective, are those goals being reached? For sure. And I think, some of these, museums like the Holocaust Museum, the 9/11 Museum, places where really trying to connect people on a very personal level with, for the purpose of learning and remembrance, and which can be incredibly evocative, transformative, emotional experience. Sort of understanding what actually happens, like what is the range of reactions that people have, how is that related to their prior subjective experience and history, and who is not reacting in the way that you would expect, and then trying to probe why, so that you can make adjustments to make sure you're reaching the whole of the population.
Yeah, and I think that then that raises interesting questions for how do we set emotional goals for an experience.
Right.
And Jen asked about the price range for the equipment you would use for this kind of study, the bracelets and glasses, and the learning curve for using them.
Yeah. So the bracelets are, well, I was going to say they're not that expensive, but they, relative to the glasses, they're not that expensive. They're about $2,000 each. You need to have two to run on a single person. So we bought, I think, 4 for this, so we could run 2 people at a time. And in terms of their use, they're very easy to figure out how to use. The coding that you need to do to be able to assess what a peak is not that straightforward. And in fact, we worked with Shawnee Daly, who's now at the University of Florida, to do that work. She came out of Media Lab and was involved in the development of the bracelets. I think that's definitely a hurdle, and I would suggest if you're going to do this work that you have a partner who can really understands the how to do the assessment, and then the coding from the data, because basically what you get is a raw readout of the person's electrodermal activity, and then you have to assess from their own baseline whether or not they have a peak, and then you have to look across people to make sure that this person's peak is the same as the person's peak. You know what I mean? So being able to compare the two across each other, everyone has their own sort of internal set point. So at the beginning of the study, for example, we had the kids watch a really boring birds migration video that had really soothing music for, I think it was 7 minutes, in order to get their bottom baseline. And then we had them do jumping jacks for a minute to get their top baseline. And then you assess everything in between relative to that. So that process was definitely a learning curve, and I would suggest having someone who does this work in the research field. So the technology isn't there yet where you can just pick it up and do it as a lay person. The eye tracking glasses were actually really easy to use. And aside from the calibration piece, it was I think we had a training with the people from Tobii, was the company that we used, and they trained us in just that 2 or 3 hours, and we were able to do it with the kids. It did take a little learning to develop like, strategies for the kids who couldn't sit still and that kind of thing, to do the calibrating. And then we had to learn how to do the coding. So it's not, they don't just give you the, what you get is like a video with, I think there's a picture. Hold on. In the slide deck, Claire, where it says dynamic measures and time series, I'll show you the coding.
About what slide number is that at?
Slide 11, I think. So we rented the glasses, and I think it was like about $5,000 a month, and we rented them for 2 months. We ran the study during that time. It was more to buy them, so if we were going to use them all the time, it would have been worth it to just buy them and have the equipment. My understanding is now, I haven't priced them yet for the new project, but they're much less expensive because that was new technology at the time, to be able to do the gaze tracking ambiently. There it is. So this is the coding software that we used, and it allowed you could see at the very bottom of the screen, that's the electrodermal activity. And then, at the bottom of the screen there, you can see there's like not much going on right there. It's like basically a flat line, but that's electrodermal activity. And then you can see you could do the coding so that it's all timed exactly at the same time. You can see at the bottom the electrodermal activity. To the left on the top, that's the video from the eye tracker, so you actually see what the person sees, and then the red dots indicate when they're focusing on something long enough to count as a gaze, which we code then for they're looking at the instructions, they're looking at their hands, they're looking at their partner. And then to the right, there's, you can see that's the video in the space where we were able to code for their behaviors. And this software is called Noldus Observer software, and allows you to take multiple different streams of physiological and self-report and video and put it all together in the same coding place so that you can see it all at the same time.
So out of curiosity, about how long does it take to analyze the data from one person going through this?
Oh my gosh. I didn't, I mean, it was pretty time intensive. I don't know, I would have to go back, and the hardest part was getting everybody reliable in the behavioral coding. The self-report data was we just had, so that was good. The folks that we worked with for the electrodermal activity, they actually have a program that does the analysis, so it's actually pretty quick. You just need somebody who knows what they're doing to run it. Mm-hmm. And so it was really the behavioral coding that took the longest, I would say. And that was pretty intensive. And you all know all about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, this is all really fascinating. I want to give everyone a chance to get another word or question in if anyone has anything else they'd like to say before we round out an hour here. Does anyone have any burning questions or requests that they would like to make before we part?
I do want to say that while people are thinking, that we really do want to collaborate around this work with other researchers and organizations and exhibit designers and everyone from the field. And so, please definitely reach out, and we'd love to talk with you more about the work.
Yeah, I would love to see the experience sampling survey that you used.
Mm-hmm.
I think that would be great, especially because you use it with middle schoolers, and instruments with younger audiences are always a little bit of a challenge. So I think that would be really interesting to see. if people want access to the recording later on, or to exchange emails, I'm trying to think the best way to do this, because I don't have the people that already signed off. But if people want to leave their emails in the chat box, I can send out a group email, and I'll put mine in there now. Or I can maybe send it out to the listserv, but this way we'll know exactly who was here today. If we want to send out any follow-up notes or materials. Oh, great. Jen was keeping a list, so that's fantastic. And I don't have anything else to add at the moment. Gabbie, is there anything else you would like to say?
No, I guess I see Liz is still there. Liz, do you have anything you want to add? I know you're sort of new to this project, but.
There we go. We're just really excited to work with Gabbie on this, and I think there's lots of exciting possibilities, as she was saying, for us to all collaborate together to think about how to apply this across the museum field and certainly other areas beyond productive struggle, where we're excited to do some research as well.
Well, thank you everybody for signing on today. I am so happy we had so many participants show up for the first chat that I've had to host, and I'm looking forward to hosting more, so keep an eye out on the listserv for more announcements to come through. Gabbie, thank you so much for your time and for sharing your experience and expertise with us, and we'll all be in touch via email.
Thank you for organizing.
Thank you all, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye. Hey John, thanks for coming to my web chat. Thanks. Thank you so much.